Father and I warned me not to bump my head on the ceiling. We have a little platform here. Anyway, it's an honor to be able to address you at this Fatima Conference during the COVID year, and unusual that we're here at Mary Immaculate Queen Parish, City of Mary as we call it, but it is getting back to our roots. This was the cradle of CMRI and the beginnings of our parish here from the late 60s on. How many times have you asked yourself the question in frustration, why doesn't he or she get it? This talk is to help answer that question, why it's so hard for human beings to get it, to accept the truth, to see the truth. And very simply put, the truth is often difficult to accept. But the truth is what it is, and we must accept it, we must believe it. It is because we have a fallen human nature that we have such a hard time accepting the truth. And that's why it's easy to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to heresy, to falsehoods. It is because we are wounded in from the beginning of original sin. And we all inherit the condition of not only original sin, but the wounds that went along with it, that we have such a struggle with accepting the truth and listening to falsehoods instead. I would like to share a little bit of philosophy with you, talk about what the greatest philosopher of the ancient era, Aristotle, and even St. Thomas Aquinas appreciates him very much. When you look at the Summa Theologica, for example, and he says the philosopher says, he's talking about Aristotle, because he came so close to explaining, he came so close to the truth, and most of what he said was exactly true, was not false in any way. So St. Thomas Aquinas appreciated that, and as I said, often quotes him. What I found very interesting is that Aristotle came up with the cardinal virtues. You all know it from your catechism, right? The 4 cardinal virtues. Let's see how well you know them. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. All right, so isn't that amazing? He died in 322 BC, so 300 years before Christ. He had already understood human nature very, very well. I like to call him the world's first great psychologist. And he pointed out 4 different powers that we have, 2 in our rational nature, 2 in our sensitive nature, as he called it. And I won't have time to explain all that, but he said we need a virtue to perfect each one of these powers. If we don't practice the virtue, we will mess up our lives. So prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. We have to practice these virtues in order to reach our final destiny. We have to we have to overcome sin. These virtues help us to overcome them. And I can at least say this very quickly. Prudence perfects our intellect, helps us to use our intellect correctly. Justice helps us to use our will correctly. Fortitude helps us to perfect our what we call the striving emotions, where we have mixed love and hate. And then temperance, it helps us to perfect our desires, which are love or hate. So again, over 300 years before Christ, Aristotle explained the necessity of living these virtues in order to have a fulfilled, happy life. He said true happiness comes from the life of virtue. It does not come from just giving in to ourselves. And Aristotle did not understand, at least certainly not as Catholics would, about the fallen nature and original sin. But he understood that we have this nature that has to be perfected. So far so good. These four cardinal virtues. Now in the Catholic era, we find better explanations. The Church has kept these four virtues, obviously, because it's absolutely correct. But St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica, and he's quoting St. Bede the Venerable, talks about the four wounds of the soul. 4 wounds. What are these? Well, these are the wounds, you might say, are the things that are going to be healed by these virtues. So here we have ignorance, malice, weakness, and concupiscence. So with the light of the gospel, we can understand even better about the 4 cardinal virtues. So again, Aristotle said you have to do these in order to to fulfill your destiny in life, to reach happiness. And understanding the effects of original sin, we find that we are prone to ignorance, not knowing, not wanting to know what we should know. We are prone to malice, doing bad things. And that is perfected by the virtue of justice, which tells us to always give to everybody what we owe to them. We all are weak. We know what we should do, but we don't feel like doing it. So we need the virtue of fortitude to help us overcome our weakness, to do the hard things that we have to do. We also have concupiscence, which is the desire for pleasure, for its own sake, whether it's right or wrong. It feels good. I like it. I enjoy it. We need the virtue of temperance to say no to ourselves, especially when it's sinful pleasure. So getting back to the main theme of this talk, turning a blind eye to heresy and a deaf ear to heresy. In other words, just not worrying about heresy. It is especially because of these wounds, and I would say here, ignorance. We naturally tend to not want to know what we ought to know. So we're not as rational and logical as we'd like to think ourselves. During the 18th and 19th century, we had the age of rationality, of reason, that we will always do the right thing. We can reason things out. We've all got this great logic. And then we find through the horrors of the 20th century that we're really not that logical and reasonable. Again, because we have these wounds. We are wounded as human beings because of original sin. So we are susceptible to falsehoods. We can pick up on errors quite easily. I'm no fan of Mark Twain. You've all heard of him, right? Okay, he was really anti-Catholic, but some of the things he said were quite true. One of his sayings that I do agree with is, if you don't read the newspapers, you are uninformed. If you read the newspapers, you are misinformed. Isn't that the truth? All right, so we are susceptible to brainwashing. Brainwashing, what is that? It's used as it's a tactic used. Well, I shouldn't say it's brainwashing here, but tyrants like to make use of brainwashing, where they put people under very difficult circumstances and keep repeating something over and over again. And because they're in that suffering, even probably tortured state, they're very susceptible to the communist propaganda. So that's brainwashing, with the added duress added to that. We don't have that, but still, in a sense, in a broader sense of the word, there's brainwashing that goes on because things are repeated over and over and over again, and people pick up on that. By the way, isn't this what happens with advertising? I'm going to check to see how well you're aware of some slogans right now. So let's try a few examples. McDonald's, finish it. I'm loving it. See, you're listening. Okay, the slogan has been put out there. So Nike, just. Oh, you all know that one. Wheaties, breakfast of. See, you all know this. Okay. Kentucky Fried Chicken, finger. Okay. Apple, think. Oh, you don't know that one too well. Think different is Apple's slogan. Okay. United, fly the friendly skies of United. Okay. Allstate, you are in. One last one, maybe more so the men here. Ford trucks are built tough. True, I was told over here. Okay. Okay, now, many slogans are true, but many are not. But it's the power of the repetition that gets into people's consciousness. You can see, we just saw how that works in our own lives. So we have to be careful to look at the slogan and see if it's really true or not just do it because we've heard it over and over again. By the way, in one of the theological fallacies there is called appeal to shame. And that is when you buy a product because it was endorsed by a particular celebrity. I mean, what does that celebrity really know about that product? They were just paid to say, buy it. So again, we are susceptible to just following these kinds of things. We tend to follow the crowd. No wonder our Lord called us sheep, because sheep are such big followers. Again, we are wounded. We tend towards ignorance, towards malice, weakness, and concupiscence. And it takes spiritual tools, it takes real effort to heal those wounds and not be susceptible to falsehood and error. Our Lord came to lift up this fallen nature. I'm forgetting where it was said, but man had fallen so hard and so low because of the sin of Adam and Eve. He could never lift himself up. He could never ennoble himself, live up to the dignity of his human condition, which was really meant to be supernatural through sanctifying grace. But fortunately, God loved this fallen nature so much that he came to lift us up. He came to redeem us, and he gave us a church because we need this church. We need the means of grace to come up out of our fallen state. Our Lord said in John chapter 8, verse 32, "The truth shall set you free." It is the truth that Christ brought to the world that dignifies us, sets us free, and helps us. By the way, in that same chapter earlier on, it starts off with our Lord and who had the adulterous woman brought to him. And our Lord's enemies thought they were going to confound him because, here's this sinner according to the Mosaic law. She's caught, committing her adultery, she should be stoned right there. And our Lord told them a third way that they hadn't thought about that completely confounded them. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Also in that same chapter, we have the gospel that we read on Passion Sunday every year, how our Lord says, you are not of God, you're not of the Father. In other words, you do not want the truth. You want to persist in your falsehood. So, again, our Lord came to set us free by giving us the truth. But the truth isn't always what we want it to be, but that doesn't matter. If it's true, we accept it, we believe it. That is what Christ came to teach us. I remember one of my parishioners from St. Mary's, God rest his soul, Bob Wolf. He had very insightful sayings, and one of them was, people lose their minds in droves, but they recover their sanity one at a time. We have some other great sayings, and these are true slogans. Right is right, even if no one else is doing it. Another one that I came across I thought was really great was, if you ever find yourself in the majority, it's time to change sides. Because so often the truth is not what the majority is doing. When falsehood is preached by a powerful person, it has a profound effect. And the enemies of the church understood this. I'm sure you've read this excerpt from the Alta Vendita, which was from secret documents captured in 1846. But this talks about how the enemies of the church knew they needed to get somebody in the highest echelon of the church, the papacy even, so that they could truly do their evil work. They found that attacking the church from the outside did not produce results. So they'd have to worm their way in. And then when the falsehood is preached from the highest throne of the church, there is a much better chance of people accepting that falsehood, because the authority in the church said so. But it's good to go over this quote from time to time. So let's listen to it again. The Pope, whoever he is, will never come to the secret societies. It is up to the secret societies to take the first step towards the church with the aim of conquering both of them. The task that we are going to undertake is not the work of a day or of a month or of a year. It may last several years, perhaps a century. But in our ranks, the soldier dies and the struggle goes on. We do not intend to win the popes to our cause, to make them neophytes of our principles, propagators of our ideas. That would be a ridiculous dream, and if events turn out in some way, if cardinals or prelates, for example, of their own free will or by surprise, should enter into part of our secrets, that is not at all an inventive, or it should be probably incentive, for desiring their elevation to the see of Peter. What we must ask for, what we should look for and wait for, as the Jews wait for the Messiah, is a pope according to our needs. With that, we shall march more securely towards the assault on the church than with pamphlets of our brethren in France and even the gold of England. Do you want to know the reason for this? It is that with this, in order to shatter the high rock on which God has built his church, we no longer need Hannibalian vinegar or need gunpowder or even need our arms. We have the little finger of the successor of Peter engaged in the ploy, and this little finger is as good for this crusade as all the Urban IIs and all the St. Bernards in Christendom. So this has been detailed in writings about the Alta Vendita, definitely a Freemasonic organization or allied with the Freemasons, and these documents were captured, as I said, in 1846. So that's what they wanted to do. We have to have the falsehood preached from the top. And we see that happened with Vatican II. There were 2,400 participants in Vatican Council II. Cardinals, archbishops, bishops, patriarchs, heads of superior generals of orders, of religious orders that were invited. And blatant heresy was taught in the documents of Vatican II. But once Paul VI put his signature to these heretical documents, and again, the primary heresies were false ecumenism, religious liberty, collegiality. Once he put his signature to it, then if you didn't, as a bishop, sign it, then you were not with the Holy Father. You were going against the infallible head of the church. So where was the outcry in 1964-65, when these documents were signed? There wasn't the outcry. But 2020 vision, we look back, and by the late 60s, there were traditional Catholics who were saying, if that heresy, or since that is heresy, and it was promoted by the Pope and the bishops, then they put themselves out of the church through their heresy. So it was the master stroke of the devil and of his minions here on earth to have officially promulgated heresy the result of Vatican II. And then the downward slide continued. We saw horror after horror after horror happening, and it continues. That's where it went off the rails. And Vatican II absolutely has to be condemned as a false council, which means that the Pope who promulgated it had to be a false Pope. He couldn't possibly, the Vicar of Christ, and officially promulgate such heresy. So, if he were a true Pope, of course, he would have never done that. So it is true to say, obey the Holy Father. And again, this was the masterstroke to make it look like he was the real Pope, promulgate all this, and out of obedience, you have to follow this. And he's infallible after all, isn't he? But then you start thinking things through, and you realize he couldn't have been the true Pope. This couldn't have been. The true church does not give heresy to its children. The true church does not give stones for bread. It can't. It is the infallible guarantor of the truth. But this is what's so difficult for people to understand. And when the heresy has been preached from the top, how easy it is to turn that blind eye and turn a deaf ear to it. Well, this is what the Pope teaches. Who am I to disagree? Another problem we face is that we do not have enough horror of heresy. And why should we have a horror for heresy? Because, and it hurts to even put it this way, but it makes our Lord a liar. That's why heresy is so bad. It's one of the greatest sins possible. But, we all live in a very pluralistic society, freedom of religion in our country, and that's become the standard pretty much, in most other countries. And so that promotes that indifferentism to the truth. It's, my good neighbor over here, he's a Jew. My nice neighbor over here is a Buddhist. The family across the street, they're nice Lutherans. And of course, it's not judging their souls. We're not in a position to do that. Like God alone knows what goes on in a person's mind. But there's that indifferentism there. It really doesn't matter what religion you belong to, but that is pure heresy. Our Lord founded only one church, only one religion, not many churches. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one cometh to the Father except through me, our Lord teaches. You know, this sense of this horror of heresy was found, of course, in all the saints. But I'm thinking of this one example from the life of St. Frances de Chantal, who was a married woman, very holy woman, and after her husband died, she became a religious, and together with St. Francis de Sales, founded the Order of the Visitation. But when she was a little girl, her family had a visitor come, and he was a Calvinist, and this was only like within 100 years of the Protestant revolt. So anyway, for whatever reason, this man was visiting her family, and as a young girl, again, shows her innocence, her holiness at that age. She heard him say, Jesus is not present in the Holy Eucharist. She was horrified by that. And she began to refute him, saying, "You don't say that." And to quiet her down, the man gave her a piece of candy. Here, little kid, have this piece of candy. She marched over to the fireplace and threw it into the fire and says, "That's where people go who deny the doctrine of the Holy Eucharist." Why did she say that? Because she understood the evil of that heresy, of denying the real presence of our Lord in the Holy Eucharist. I think this quote from Father Faber is so good. It's from his book, The Precious Blood, 1860. And this is what he writes. Now, this is not official church teaching, but this is definitely one of the approved authors, and just so well put. And I believe he was a convert from Anglicanism himself. But this is what he writes. Then again, the crowning disloyalty to God is heresy. It is the sin of sins, the very loathsomest of things which God looks down upon in this malignant world. Yet how little do we understand of its excessive hatefulness. It is the polluting of God's truth, which is the worst of all impurities. Yet how light we make of it. We look at it and we are calm. We touch it and do not shudder. We mix with it and have no fear. We see it touch holy things and we have no sense of sacrilege. We breathe its odor and show no signs of detestation or disgust. Some of us affect its friendship, and some even extenuate its guilt. We do not love God enough to be angry for his glory. We do not love men enough to be charitably truthful for their souls. We can dwell amidst this odious plague in imperturbable tranquility, reconciled to its foulness, not without some boastful professions of liberal admiration, perhaps even with a solicitous show of tolerant sympathies. We have not the antique sternness. Our charity is untruthful because it is not severe, and it is unpersuasive because it is untruthful. I'm going to skip some of this, but you can see how eloquently he makes his point. But here I'll close with this sentence. Where there is no hatred of heresy, there is no holiness. So, very powerfully put. It really makes you think. Objectively, heresy is a most horrible thing. Now, we, of course, as St. Augustine would say, we hate the sin, but not the sinner. We don't hate the heretic, but we, out of true love, we have to try to bring him to awareness of his heresy. So, one of the methods used, besides the fact that, from the top down by a purported pope, heresy was promulgated, other things are used that to justify Vatican II, and I'm sure that you have heard these many a time, but I'd like to make a short list of some of the slogans used for us to become part. Why aren't you part of the Catholic Church? Okay, so as a matter of fact, it'd be worthwhile, I think, to put some of these on the board. Okay, the first one, the first slogan, and these are, by the way, erroneous slogans. There's error in them, so we definitely want to understand that. You're not with the Pope. Okay. Okay, how do we answer that one? Actually, we can use a short slogan to refute that. One of them would be, I'm more Catholic than the Pope. Or, I'm Catholic and he's not. All right, so false slogan, you're not with the Pope. Yeah, if he was the Pope, we would be lining up to submit to him. We believe in the papacy. We just don't accept imposters. Okay, and what's amazing is so many of the R&R, the recognize and resist people, say, he doesn't have the faith. We have to convert him back to the faith. But he's the Holy Father. I mean, the absurdity of it. The absolute absurdity. So again, our short true slogans. I'm Catholic, he's not. Or if he's a Catholic, I will most certainly submit to him. Okay, next slogan. How can so few of you be right? And by the way, I would welcome any contributions to this, but I'm just trying to come up with my own responses that I've used many a time. I'm sure you've also used them. My answer would be numbers have never been the determinant of truth. Okay? It's never, we don't go by the numbers. What's the majority doing? That's the true thing. Most of the time they're wrong. Okay? Here's another one. You're stuck in the past. What's a simple one that we could use to refute that? Well, the truth doesn't change with the times. Yes, which was and ever shall be. Okay, now I'm going to give you a very long quote now here from Vatican Council I that is the absolute clincher, and I'm sorry I don't have time to write it out on the board, but I can tell you, if you want to look it up, Session 3, Chapter 4. This is the absolute clincher for those that say, things can change. Listen to this. For the doctrine of the faith which God has revealed is put forward not as some philosophical discovery capable of being perfected by human intelligence, but as a divine deposit committed to the spouse of Christ to be faithfully protected and infallibly promulgated. Here it is. Here it is. The absolute clincher. There's no refutation. There's no response possible. Hence, too, that meaning of the sacred dogmas is ever to be maintained, which has once been declared by Holy Mother Church, and there must never be any abandonment of this sense under the pretext or in the name of a more profound understanding. It just can't happen. It never will happen. So that's the longer quote you can use, who say the truth changes with the times. Okay, number 4, you don't have the authority. How many times have you heard that? You don't have the authority to be doing what you're doing. Okay, a simple answer to that one would be, well, I would ask a question. Do this next time somebody tells you you don't have the authority. Say, do I need authority to say that 2 + 2 = 4? And what would they say? Well, of course you don't need authority. You're just recognizing the truth. Bingo. That is there it is. We don't need authority to recognize the truth. We have the obligation to recognize the truth. And when I see that the teachings of Vatican II and post-Vatican II contradict previous teachings, it's not an act of authority. That's an act of using my eyes and using my ears to see the truth. And then I have to choose accordingly. You don't need authority to see the truth and to follow the truth. You have the obligation to do so. Another one is, I like the new Mass. Although as many good people that were scandalized by it and left it, but there are unfortunately many that say, oh, I like that. Well, a short answer to that is Cardinal Ottaviani, former Secretary of the Holy Office in 1969, wrote to Paul VI, his famous letter, said, this is a Protestantized liturgy. So there, you're following a Protestantized liturgy. I wish I had time to write out the arguments here, but again, our time is limited. And then finally, here's another one about what's happened in the church. It can't happen. And we would use then 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where St. Paul says, there will be a great falling away, and the man of sin will be revealed. He will give himself out to be worshipped as though he were God. So it's right there. There will be a great apostasy. The word used in the Greek for falling away is apostasia. So you can translate it as the great falling away or the great apostasy. This has happened. So it is difficult to bring people to the truth. Again, we realize that we have this wounded nature, and of course, it doesn't help that the devil is whispering in people's ears, right? Trying to get them to keep following their fallen human nature. The world is beckoning. Our spiritual enemies are against us, but still, the truth is not impossible to reach. We have to reach it in order to save our souls. So it's difficult to bring people to the truth, but we have to have hope. I was blessed with wonderful parents who were such good Catholics. And long story short, they were refugees from communist Lithuania. They escaped from two different parts of the country. They met actually in this country. But they lived for about 3 years under Nazi occupation and a year and a half under the Soviet occupation, and they knew their families were scheduled to be deported. So they were able to escape, and they recognized the evils of communism always, and they could see this communist liberal, tendency, and they were always very keen about that because they suffered from it. And when the changes came, my parents recognized it early on, and we left our parish in 1967, 68, even before the Novus Ordo. We kids, my two sisters and I, we didn't understand, but of course parents are making the decisions for their children. And then we moved to northern Idaho. And 1970, they built a house just about a mile down the road from here, and in living their Catholic faith, their traditional Catholic faith, they also had a great desire to help their fellow Lithuanians in this country and in other countries of the world, and at their own expense, basically out of their own pocket, they were printing a bulletin called Stella Maris, Star of the Sea, all in Lithuanian, and they were just putting the word out to anybody that they knew that was Lithuanian. And they probably got some donations from time to time, but for the most part it was out of their own pocket. And I can remember licking many a stamp and get the mailings out And my mother's there. She's saying, say a short prayer for each one of these stamps you put on, And even struck me back then, it seemed like such a fruitless effort because my parents thought that, having experienced the horror of communism, the ones that escaped, they would understand better. But it seemed like most of the Lithuanians, the vast, vast majority, they were all going for Vatican II. And my parents kept up their effort for about some 10 years. And then my father died in an accident in 1980. And my mother was accepted into CMRI as a religious sister. It's kind of a unique situation, but she had a true second calling. But for about 10 years there, they were really working hard to try to bring their fellow Lithuanians out of Vatican II, and they saw so little fruit. But remember, we're planting a seed, and I can see years later that they were planting the results of that. I do remember one of the Vatican II nuns did leave, at least for a while, in 1974. So unfortunately, her order pulled her back away. But at least for a while, Sister Mary Bernarda was traditional Catholic. I found out later from a man who was a Lithuanian man who I just saw a couple of years ago. And his mother was his parents were on my parents' mailing list. And he said, yeah, I remember growing up, all these good bulletins that your parents were sending out. I was thinking, wow, after 40 years, it's great to hear there's some kind of results. So they were planting the seed. And even some of my relatives, they became a lot more favorable to the traditional Catholicism, although they were condemning us as a cult. And they were victims of the slogans. You got to do all this. So remember, we are planting seeds, and we have to do everything we can to help encourage that. Just in the last week, I got calls from 2 women in New York City, or state of New York. One of them this very morning from Long Island. She had seen 2 of our nuns walking the street somewhere on Long Island. She went up to them, made a quick connection, found out they were traditional Catholic. And just this morning, she calls me, are you connected with those nuns? What were they doing there? I said, I don't know. They were there. But you see the power of the religious habit? And she's asking me these questions, what do I do? She said, Father, I hate to tell you this, but the Pope is evil. They said, you're right. And so I was able to put her in touch with one of our priests out with Father Laterno. He knows better where she can go to church. But she said, I couldn't believe my ears. The priest is quoting Father James Martin. Novus Ordo Watch has correctly identified him as Hellboy because of what he's preaching. And she says, what do I do? I stopped going. So here you have somebody who's, she's Catholic. There's good people like this. And last week I talked to another lady, very similar circumstances. What's interesting, too, is the parallel between what's going on in Novus Ordo and in the political realm. If any of you looked at the hashtag walk away, I would encourage you to look at those videos. They're available. Walk away. And it is Democrats, former Democrats, who said, it's the same thing. I've listened to the slogans for all my life. I started to do my research. I realize that it's not true what I've been told, and I'm walking away. And I mean, almost everyone you click on has got a really great story. So people are walking away from the evil position of the Democrat Party, and people are walking away, thank God, from the evils of Vatican II. They are no longer turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to the heresy. They want to be Catholic. So what can we do? Meditate and do mental prayer. That helps to get rid of false ideas. We have false ideas in our minds. We have to, through prayer and guidance of the church, get rid of false ideas. And on a prayer level, to do that through meditation, it's very, very helpful. Offer up prayer and sacrifice. As Our Lady said at Fatima, there's so many perish because you don't offer up the prayers and sacrifices. That always opens people's eyes spiritually and opens their ears in a way that other things will never do. Reach out in firm conviction and in charity. St. Francis de Sales was reputed to have personally converted somewhere between 70 and 80,000 Calvinist heretics. Now, he was a bishop. That's his duty to do that, but they could sense his charity. There was a saying, if St. Francis can be so charitable, so loving and trying to reach us and pull us out of our problems, of our heresy, how good God must be. So we have to do it with charity. And yes, my dear brethren, we are in the minority. But remember, it was only a minority at the foot of the cross. But they had the truth. Let us stand in union with Mary, and that's how we'll be able to persevere. God bless you.